All right. Good morning, everybody. This is Uncle D with the Lean Guys podcast. With us today is a very special guest. One of, I know, is a mentor for me and certainly for Johnny Dubois. Mike Floyd. Welcome, Mike. How you doing, buddy?
Greetings. Good to see you guys.
Good.
Doing well.
Say there's a third lean guy that's missing today, but we'll get him on the next time you're on the show. Would you do a favor for our listeners? Would you introduce yourself? Let everybody know a little bit more about who you are, what you did in your career, and maybe how you came to know John and I.
Oh, yeah, excellent. I was a Navy veteran. I got out. I went to school at University of New Mexico, got a degree in mechanical engineering. I came out, worked for Motorola, straight out of school. At that time, it was interesting. I went into the quality organization. A couple years later, I transitioned into the engineering organization for the next 5 or 6 years, and then got a real enamoring for the manufacturing side of the fence, basically advanced manufacturing, and all this was in the space business. So this is all for satellite equipment, satellite radios, those types of things. And so after about 10, 15 years, I pretty much had a part and played in most of the life cycle elements of a program. I was very interested to see how those transpired over time. So I eventually became a director, away now from the projects themselves and overseeing large departments. I oversaw as an engineering director, as a manufacturing director. In that process, you see the big picture, you see programs going south, you see lots of money. I mean, these programs I'm talking are typically $200 to $300 million a piece. Their life cycle's typically 3 to 5 years before delivery, type of thing. Half of it's classified, the other half's not, that type of thing. So very serious business, very big national security implications to the outcome. Like I said, lots of dollars, lots and lots of customer oversight, tons and tons of regulations and rules. I mean,
Right.
Just completely complex business, yet you look back and you go, we're not going to make it at this pace we're on and with the problems we're having. And some of this is launch dependent, and the last thing you ever want to do as a company is be the reason that they had to move a launch, because those windows don't come along very often.
Right.
So it was in those capacities, and in the process I was going through some concurrent engineering master's work with the Arizona State University. I wrote a nice big thesis with a couple of the professors there on concurrent engineering. Started seeing the power of concurrent engineering, ran a couple programs that way. But when you're in trouble, you're the director at the big high level, you say, I've got to bring in external help. It's obvious, even with our continuous improvement body within the company, we're not solving these problems, and we got some big cliffs in front of us, and we don't want to fall off them. So through the process.
Is that a nice way of saying I need a sacrificial lamb because it's too hot to do it internal?
Yeah, I've heard you guys use that term. It is. I hear you guys use that term. I think anyone watching this that's part of a big company knows, hey, I'm not going to fall on my sword on this.
Right.
And I'm not going to tell the emperor he has no clothes when he's the one that sets my promotions and my salaries and my bonuses, right?
That's correct.
You got all these boundaries instead. Now, let me flip it around, though. So then if you bring in an external source that can't relate and can't assimilate, and I got to just bounce off the site, because when I brought you guys in, I used to comment to you guys, it's a matter of hours. You're speaking the lingo. And I'm looking at you going, how the hell did you know the name, and well, the one guy said it an hour ago, and I'm playing it back, and when he said it, I noticed everybody's eyes went like that. So I'm going to use that vocabulary in the process here. And it wasn't by noon that everyone thought you're working there. They're like, what part of the company did he come from, and where do we get these guys? I'm like, no, they don't work for our company.
I used to turn my visitor badge backwards so that you couldn't see the red piece.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew I needed for my ITAR, and it stayed with somebody and all that, but it was interesting for me to see, that part of lean. For me, it was like 5S and cell flow and plant layouts and stuff. And all of a sudden, this is at a program level.
Yeah, it was a whole different level than what we were normally tackling.
Right.
And it brought its own challenges, but it brought its own fun and reward too. I mean, those were fun Very intense, but fun projects.
In the end, they're a blast. You're right, but you've got that tipping point where you're like, and you guys used to say we got about 3 hours to know whether we're going to come out of this alive or not.
Right,
By the way, now I remember where I met you, Johnny D, teaching us how to build a clock over there in
Right.
the manufacturing extension program.
that's right.
In that training.
I said, man, God, this guy's an arrogant son of a bitch, but looks like I'm going to learn something.
And the funniest part was, I think in like the third round or whatever, you made some kind of comment how you were calling in sick or going on strike, or I don't remember what it was, but you were just going to be a disruptor. And so I just looked at you and said, hey, that's fine. If the system's built right, it should absorb the problem. And we just kept right on rolling. And you're like, holy crap.
Yeah.
I was impressed. I was impressed.
Well, Mike, when you have nothing to lose, you just go for it, right? I mean, for us, I mean, it was like, well, listen, we usually work with small to medium-sized enterprises. We had done a bunch of work with the shipyards. We weren't afraid of big program work. Inside, I'm like, a satellite or a ship, it's not really my problem. It's the engineer's problem. It's not, but like you mentioned before, working all ends of the life cycle was something that I really find I can reflect back on now in my career as something that was a huge experience.
Mm-hmm.
When we were first brought in, it was like, we need to save a year off of a 3-year problem. But then over time, we had the opportunity to work when it was zeros and ones before it was even, a full concept, right?
Right. And if I'm imagining a lot of people that can say they've had this whole life cycle picture. If you really have, you really do understand the value of those early phases. And
Right.
I wrote a word down today. I said, or 2 words. I said the biggest problem there is lack of patience in those early phases. You're not cutting any metal. You're not making any noise. You're not bringing in people that are, quote, going to make us something that a truck can pull up and drive away and then we get our check. So what are you doing? And what do you mean you've got multiple options in front of you as far as your design solution, right? And we ended up, and I've had this conversation in an international meeting across the board. I won't name who set it up. A good guy, I still respect him, but he set up an international telecom back in the day. And we talked about the effect of these early phases and the fact that the U.S. industries don't have the patience like you see in Japan, like you see in other countries. And so when I was doing the master's work with ASU, we studied Japan quite frequently. They have a process, for example, where they'll have multiple design teams kicked off for months, and they'll say, here's the deal. Here's what our ultimate goal is. You 3 teams go off and work this, and we're going to have a kind of a design off in 3 or 4 months. And they would be 3 totally different solutions. And then the irony, the culture was fine with that. I mean, there was patience, which team you're on, didn't matter, whatever you're doing it. It's an innovative environment, basically.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the 3 or 4 months, they go through gates, not just dates. And I'll use that term coming up, gates, not dates. Give me a milestone I have to step over, not the fact that it's September 15th and we said we'd be done. So let's move to the next phase, right? And
Right.
it's really early. It's really easy to move to our next phases in the early stage. There's no product. The design's here. We're going to do some testing, and there's nobody pushing back. They all want to move forward. So that's another example of impatience. We just blow through it because the date hit and we're done designing. Let's move out. We'll pound the pipe, as we would say. So when these design teams in Japan would come together, they would find the optimum design. And I learned 2 important lessons from talking to one of the Japanese development engineers that we were working with. He said in Japan, they have 2 rules. The first rule is the odds that the first design that you come up with is the optimum one is 0.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The second rule is the odds of finding the optimum design goes up drastically with the number of options considered. Okay. So think about
Right.
anything in your life.
Right.
Now, one program manager can certainly argue, listen, we don't have the money to sit there and just consider an infinite number of options here. This is, so okay, fair enough. That's the outside boundary. But my argument back was, but we can't just settle with the first feasible and then pound the crap out of the pipe and hope that we get what we want out of the end of it.
That's
Okay.
right.
Would you tell people what you mean by pounding the pipe?
A pound the pipe says, okay, you could look at, I've got so many cost charts on a, if I break out the cost, I have a life cycle cost of a $300 million program. It took 5 years. It's a Pareto. It's got these low bars on the left for about 4 months, 5 months. And then this massive spike of people. Okay, we're talking 40 people to 240 people over a 4-month period. What they all are doing between those two phases is, if everybody's coming in, the production people, the material people, the quality people, the this people, the that people, we're ready to get her done. Let's take this design element. And they all got hammers, and it's called pound the pipe. If you got a big old pipe and things aren't working, you just pound on it and it gets the flow going. So every time there's a problem, just go down there and pound on that section of the pipe. And then, so they all show up, 200 of them with hammers going, we're going to pound the pipe. We're going to get this thing done. So that's the scariest part of a program to me, because, you know, there's a lot of efficiencies and innovations that weren't considered, that weren't allowed, that were never.
You're in firefighting mode. You're not in planning and ideation mode.
Firefight is another word for pound the pipe.
Pound the pipe, yeah.
Again, let's look at the life cycle effect. Once you're in that stage and you ramp up with those people, you've set, by that time, about 70% of the true life cycle costs are set. You can't affect them. When I say set, that means you can't affect them.
Right.
The only way you can affect them is drag them back into that conceptual and optimizing phase of the program, and nobody is going to commit suicide and tell the customer, hey, we had a revelation and we decided we're going to redesign this thing.
Right.
You know?
Well, you know, when you get to the point of commercialization, if you haven't invested enough upfront, and Johnny and I teach this all the time, your costs are going to go through the roof, and your break even and return on investment are just going to get pushed out, if not obliterated.
Yeah.
Right.
So the investment, we have a half dozen or so innovation projects going on right now through the Goodwill Southern California, and we're actually tracking. Johnny built this cost bogeys tracking sheet that tracks the cost from concept inception to commercialization. And if you're under, you ain't gonna make it. And because if you haven't invested up front, when you go to commercialization, your costs go through the roof. Yeah. Right. You taught us well, Mike.
Okay, now wait a minute. I have a test for you then, because I've done the same thing, trying to prove the point. And that's why I go from gates, not dates. So Johnny, let me ask you, a gate there would say, hey, we can't proceed out of this phase because our life cycle costs are too high right now. We need to massage this more and look at more innovation before we can do it. So I'll ask you the question: have you lived that life cycle model in an environment where you failed that test but continued to proceed?
Yes.
Okay.
But the
thing to do.
What's that?
It's the hardest thing to do, is to stop it because you haven't met that gate. They go, how about a bigger hammer, and we'll get the big guy that can pound the pipe even harder. That's the answer.
Or worse yet, a marketing guy builds a flyer and starts selling it.
Shut up. I've read those flyers. I'm like, is that what we have on the factory floor now? Are you kidding me? Yes.
Also do the other half of that equation and tell you something else that we've done, where we have received, this is before I became a consultant, we had received the customer supplied design, and it was a product that we needed to build. And the first thing that we did after we won the business is make a list of all the minor changes that we wanted the customer to do to their design, and all the savings that they were going to get if they gave us those concessions, because it was easy for them to draw, but not easy for us to make.
Right.
And by the way, that customer was Toyota. So when we went back to Toyota and said, listen, we want you to make some slight design changes, one, they welcomed it wholeheartedly, which my management did not believe was ever going to happen. They thought, oh my God, this is suicide. We're going to go back to them. They've given us a design and we should make it. We've already won the business. Why are we going back to them after we won the business and ask them for these changes? So now here's the funniest part about that. Toyota said, keep the money, because we were going to give them cost savings too.
Oh, gotcha.
They said, hey, use that money to continually improve your process.
That's awesome.
Okay. That's, not to talk too general, but that kind of attitude, by the way, when you're done, your team comes back, they're incentivized to find more. They're
That's
incentivized to find, it's the right thing. I'll tell you, another Japanese model, you got to lay them one over the top. It's the cost of change as you proceed down the life cycle. It's an
Right.
order of magnitude on every life cycle change you make. So if you're coming out of concept into pre-production, a change that cost $100 now costs $1,000. So John, you were in the mode where it cost $1,000.
Mhm.
And they said, fine, we should have caught it when it cost $100, but we'll pay the 1,000, right? Thank you. And they're thanking you.
Right.
Okay. And so then you get to pre-production and production. That's two more orders of magnitude. You're at, in my case, $100,000 to make a change. I'm talking a design change. By the time I'm in production in a space business with NASA and the other government entities on your lap, they're like, we've already certified it, we've already qualified it, and politically they won't even do it just for politics reasons, right? So anyway, the most astounding addition to that concept of cost increases, life cycles move, was you looked at the rate of change in a design in the Japanese world versus the rate of change in design in the US world, okay? Massive amounts of change in the early phases of the Japanese. We have the lowest. We had a nice little smooth, everything's happy. I'm coloring all the bubbles green. The customer's thrilled.
Right.
The this, the that. I had a wise engineer, systems engineer at the end of this process say, wait a minute. We win these programs and then we work our ass off to make the customer happy early. And we can see they dictate sometimes how we do development. They sign off on things they don't. They come back, they give us big bonuses because we're doing good. We're on schedule. We're all that. And we know in our hearts we're going to have a, because we followed their process, not ours, blah, blah, blah. I've heard it 100 times, right? This systems engineer, oh, by the way, so if you look at, he drew a happiness curve, a customer happiness curve, peaking in the early phases, gets down to pre-production. It's kind of, I don't know. Behind schedule, losing money and all this. And he says, we end up shipping to the customer so pissed off that the happiness curve is way down here. And that's right when we want to win more business from
That's
them.
right. That's right.
Okay?
People are dissatisfied.
They're
Right.
dissatisfied. They're
Yeah.
like, I'll never go to that company again. That's just paraphrasing. But now let's flip it. He says what we should do is put our feet down, have the patience in those early phases, piss the customer off because we're not making the kind of progress they need, have them start unhappy. We've already won the job. They're not going to kill it. Well, he said, you got to get past the point where they can kill it. You got to get them to that point, but make them unhappy. About mid-level, they realize, oh, that wasn't so bad, and then pound the hell out of it and make it successful. And when you go to rebid that, you got them way up on the happiness curve. That was genius, he said, but we don't ever do it. Don't ever do it.
No, and that's one of the struggles that we have is if anyone hasn't done this before, sometimes we struggle with getting people to realize the importance of making those investments. And if you fail early in design, by the nature of experimentation, the experiment worked.
Yeah.
So exactly. But some of those situations, Mike, I've been in, put in by you, where I'm working with a manufacturing team trying to get the supply chain and the production going on the plant floor. And then I realize, the design's not even complete. And we're buying stuff and we're putting it together. And it's like that design and build curve was so integrated that if it didn't fit, I mean, anything can fit on PowerPoint and AutoCAD, right? But when you start to do it, it's totally different.
Oh, okay. My quick story on an outboard unit up in Cape May, raining. They had a failure and they needed to replace it. The guy calls into the design team back in Scottsdale here and says, we need to replace that. And the three engineers say, okay, remove that unit and pull and put the new one in and put the 3 bolts in it. And he's like, there's not 3 bolt holes. No, if the unit we sent you has 3 holes. Now just put the screw in the 1 hole and then it'll meet with the other hole. And the guys in the rain's pouring down and the customer's pissed because the system's down. And I'm sitting in the back and these engineers are like, do you have it done? And this guy he was on a big conference call with the customer and everything else. And he said, I'm going to say this as politely as possible, gentlemen. There is no frickin' hole. And if I hear it one more time, I'm going to get on a plane and come, I won't complete the sentence there. But I'm like, okay, so these engineers think they did it right. They're not listening to the guys that are doing it. And they never did, as your point, Dennis. They never really integrated early on. That's why you see the change curve in the U.S. so far down the life cycle.
Right.
And unfortunately, when those changes cost the most.
Well, when we get hired to do lean enterprise transformation and we're doing Kaizen and continuous, it's all that's great. But working to create an effective system after, from a broken system is much harder than creating a good system from the very beginnings.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
The knowledge management is the problem, right? So you have all these really smart engineers. And we came home from an event once and our boss says to me, why does General Dynamics hire you? They got the best engineers in the world. Look at you. And I'm just like, well, thanks, but I think that outside agitation gets the communication going. And in those programs, you guys were matrix managed. You're matrix managed. And I think sometimes it was all kinds of different pulls and plays on that stuff. So as, an agitator, which you certainly were an agitator, what was the hardest thing politically to navigate when trying to get people to realize this? Because you're like, invest up front, and they're like, no, we're on budget, and you're trying to spend more up front to save more long term. So it's like you're a heretic. How did you deal with that?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you an example. What's really started my interest in concurrent engineering, I was going through the ASU stuff. I wrote a big, nice paper. I had my professors come with me to talk to 120 program managers and say, you need to look at these early phases, this life cycle activity, and its influence on your program, your total program performance. And you guys are blowing through it. And I told them all pretty much the baby's ugly and you don't know what the hell you're doing, basically. But here's the way to do it, and here's the right way to do it. So afterwards, gentleman Erling R., he was a VP of engineering. They were clapping, okay, got it. And you showed all the statistics and why and how it can be done. And he comes up to me and he says, I've got a program I want you to run. And I'm like, well, I'm really more into just getting on the podium and telling how screwed up you guys are. I'm not really into that. And he goes, you know what? These two professors can say that, but you work for me. And here's your new program. Because it was going to lose millions, right?
Right.
And so we went in and how hard it was to tell the customer, restricted customer, I said, dude, the bill of material on this thing alone as it is more than the program value. That's just the bill of material for the parts, let alone the design work we have to do and the testing and all that, right? So I pulled it back. I took $400K out of the budget, downstream budget, and pulled that thing back into the development. And the chief engineers in the company, everybody's like, WTF, big time. What are you talking? So, and the big Scotty M, the top program manager, said, great. Now we're going to lose the millions and another 400K thanks to this bozo. And I told my section manager, I'm not taking this program unless we can do that.
Right.
And he said, okay. So this unit had 3 printed wiring boards and a large ASIC. True story. An ASIC is an application-specific IC. They took a legacy design and they were just trying to manipulate it. Again, way down the life cycle, can I get it done?
Right.
And I said, no, we got to throw half of that away and do it over again. We went from 3 boards to 1 board because we did double-sided. Okay, we went to mostly surface mount, but the guy with the doing the ASIC was $1 million ASIC development. And he said, wait a minute, am I to understand I've got more room on the board? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, I can do this with 4 ACT 240 devices and I could be done in a week and off your program. I said, what? He goes, yeah. I said, his name was Parker. Parker, would you come with me? We walked into my section manager's office. He was busy. I said, I don't care. Shut the door. I said, Parker, you tell him what you just told me. He goes, well, when they went to 1 board and it was a bigger board and all that, I had more room. The only reason I did an ASIC is you only gave me that much room to put my functionality in, so I had to go with an ASIC. He said, so I'm going to do 4 ACT 240s, and I'm going to update the schematic tomorrow, and I'm off Mike's program on Friday, and you could put $1 million back in the coffer.
Unbelievable.
And he walked out the door, and John looked to me, and he goes, you got to be kidding me. And I said, that was one change. We made so many, but that one change paid for that 400K. Okay. And so the team at the end of the program, including the customer, thanked me for teaching them concurrent engineering, but you get you get a feel, once you get the taste of that, and once
Right.
you've been there and see it work,
Mm-hmm.
and you guys know this too, with all the lean elements and stuff, nobody can, value stream mapping as a tool, for example, nobody can tell you that that's not a valuable tool.
Right.
Nobody can say, oh no, don't use that because we've used it and we tried it, it's not worth it. No. I have seen this work. It's a religion to me at this point. These
It
tools
is.
work. You can never convince me that it's not going to work.
Absolutely.
And that's the curse that you guys have, by the way. It's a curse. You can lie to yourself. You can cheat. You can tell a company they're great. But at the end of the day, I know you walk out going, damn, that's FUBARD. That's FUBARD. And I don't want to tell the guy, but he needs a lot more work than this,
The more FUBAR, the better.
Mike, sometimes, I was listening to you go on and on and on like you were just now, but
Johnny, he's our. Go for it, Mike. He took the gloves off. Let him have it. Let him have it.
Anyway, sometimes I got to admit though that sometimes we're just lucky, and I think one of the luckiest times that I can recall being on a program with you was you guys were really up against it, and we didn't know. Exactly what we're going to do. We started off just trying to get a value stream map going. And there was not just you folks, but it was your customers and some of your suppliers all in the room at the same time. And everybody had contractual language that they were trying to achieve. And there was a couple of milestones that people kept talking about missing. And so I immediately stopped the whole facilitation. I said, listen, I think I'm onto something. I don't know. I want each one of you to just go to a different part of the room and write down what you think is involved in that milestone. And then they all went and they all thought contractually it means this, 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 and this. And then when they all came back together, none of them matched.
Right.
And
was that the heart of the matter?
That was the heart of the matter. And then that turned into a completely different session where, okay, now we can all admit that the reason we're behind is we didn't really understand what our true milestones were. Now we can get to concurrence on that. And now that we have concurrence, how do we make up all this time? And really the biggest issue that we just dealt with is get rid of all the handoffs. Instead of saying, yes, achieve this milestone and let's hand it from group to group to group until it takes 2 months to come back around, let's all meet at the same time and concur that we have in fact achieved these milestones. And what did that say to you, Mike? That put you guys completely back on track, didn't it?
Well, I remember, if I can, you get me excited here, John, because that's all, everything you said is how it happened. I go back to not to give it away, but just the starting exercise you guys do with the tennis balls. Here, we're going to pass them around. Everyone's like, all right, whatever. And you go, okay, you did it in 30 seconds. I've seen teams do it in 10. No way. So we get it down to 20 seconds and they're throwing it and they're trying to hand off. And you go, okay, now I'll be honest with you. I've seen a team do it in 1 second. There's no freaking way that it can go through everybody's hands in 1 second. Absolutely no way. So guess what? I'll give it away. Everyone holds their hands like that. It makes a tube. You drop the ball from the start down to the bottom. It passed every hand in the sequence you defined. And it fell out the bottom and it took less than a second. And people go, oh, well, if that's what you mean, and we go, that's what we mean. So in your context on that example, do you remember us hovering around the phone? We had the Air Force.
That's correct.
Our direct prime customer, we had 2 or 3 suppliers and they were trying to approve source control drawings, we call them. It's kind of like you with the Japanese model that said, we got this drawing, we had to build it. That's a source control drawing. Mm-hmm. Then you called back to the designers and said, we need to make a change, right? Well, John's right. It goes handoff. That was a 3-month process. We were 4 months behind on the program. We said, okay, tennis ball example. You guys get yourself some plane tickets. You got 15 of these source control drawings across 15 suppliers. I need an Air Force rep. I need a Navy rep. I need a customer rep. I need this rep. And I need you all in these buildings for at least 2 days at a time.
That's right.
And it's going to take 2 months, and you're going to tell your wife you're not going to be there in 2 months for 2 months. And the customer top said, wow, that might work. And you don't leave that supplier facility till you all agree. None of this handoff, rework loop, because Dennis, you asked them too. What is the yield on your first source control drawing when it gets to the next level? Oh, yield, huh? Why are you asking yield? Well, because it's a handoff. I just want to know. And the guys all argue and they go, about 20%.
Yeah.
You go, okay, that's the first handoff is 20% accurate.
You're never going to make it.
You're not going to make it. You compound that with 5 or 6 handoffs, you're dead. And that's the problem the program had. So get all 6 of those handoffs in the same room, guys. They did it in 2 months. That's, by the way, that's missing a launch window on the program we were talking. We would have.
Would have missed the launch window.
Would have missed it. It beat the crap out of them, but that team all got together. They started learning each other from the government, from the customer, from the this. When they went to each of the suppliers, after a while, they all had a very common knowledge of what the requirements were.
That's right. And they were an integrated team.
They integrated and made changes right there in the supplier's facility so it was producible when they left. And guys, we get held back. That was a $9 million 3-month savings to the program.
Yeah, those things are no joke. And when we talk about supplier development and supply chain integration, this is the example that I think of. I mean, there's all kinds of very practical business school stuff that people do, but this was really roll up your sleeves and dig in hard into contracts and negotiate what is the best future for this thing. And that supplier development and supply chain integration, then I think it's more than likely, I got to believe it set a precedent, like you mentioned, right? They then knew what to do. Yeah. So on subsequent programs, that style rubs off on people. They're never going to go back.
That's had so many other ancillary benefits. I got to bounce around to another genius move you guys made in a value stream effort on the Coast Guard job we were running. And it was a factory floor issue and so forth. And we looked at lead times on materials, pretty basic stuff, right? And we found out that this one supplier was having a hard time meeting demand, and it was one of the fundamental building blocks of the units that we needed to get out. That was 13 days from land to sea, if you remember that.
13.3 to land to sea, that's right.
13.3 from land to sea, and it was a 2.5-month job, and we got it down by the time you guys left to 13 days.
13 and a third days.
13 and a third days. So 13 and a third was the tack time, for those of you that were wondering. We had a tack time for these units, and it was 13.3 days. And we hit it nuts on, right?
You hit it. They hit it for the rest of the 270 units. So if you move those 270 to a 2-month lead time, that's years in delay. So by the way, when you went down to auger down right there in the meeting, tell me what's the biggest problem with this supplier? You, material guy, go tell me. He comes in, he says, this is true story. He says, the biggest thing is they got the units all right, but their enclosure supplier is always late. He's the sheet metal guy. And the guy at the back of the room again, chewing on the toothpick, goes, wait a minute. The very first thing we do when we get those units is we take them out of the enclosure and throw the enclosure in the back behind the building. Because it's not compatible with our rack system.
Right.
And the program manager's in the other corner going, what? He goes, we wait 2 weeks extra for the enclosure. And he goes, look in the back, there's 100 of them stacked on top of each other.
You know,
and then they got with the supplier, and he said, I'll drop the price by $300 or $400 if you'd make it so I don't have to build an enclosure. But I mean, those are the kind of things, Dennis, that if you aren't talking and doing what you guys are doing, you're not getting those 4 people in the room.
Well, even more specifically to your point about concurrent engineering is if they had integrated up front and invested in doing all of those things that it would require, then maybe they would have caught that and they wouldn't have lost all of the opportunity that they did up to that point.
That's a true statement. No argument there at all. Exactly.
From that point, when this is about 2008 when you put John and I heavy into the, let's call it the innovation lane, with some of the project work we've done. He and I have used the Kano model and the diffusion of innovation and in all kinds of other programs to the point where we're still doing it today. Like I mentioned, I've got 6 clients right now doing this with the Goodwill. And in 4 of the 6 instances, we've had aha moments because of the investment up front. When people were already jumping to conclusions, we kept reining them back and reining them back and reining them back. And then we're, getting into conversations deeper is, like you said, it takes patience. It's something that a lot of people don't have right now. So, you know, it's difficult to try to get people to invest and slow down because everyone's going so fast. I don't know how you see it.
Hmm. I do see it. I being in the government world too, and we'll talk about this as a whole nother session we need to have about the way the procurement machine works within the government to commercials or to private company solicitations. The government
Mhm.
only allows you so much money that they'll reimburse you for those early, what we call proposal development. In other words, it's not even the design of the system, in a sense, not detailed design, but it's the concept and the proposal. Just a quick example, some of them, they'll only fund 5 or 6 people for 2 or 3 months on something that you can bill them back for. Everything else is going to come out of the company's pocket, right, to win the job.
Right.
So by definition, and this is the big argument I had with a bunch of defense people online, a bunch of defense procurement people online in this national meeting we were on.
That's a good idea to get in fights online.
It's not, it wasn't, I was just, well,
I'm fucking with you, dude.
I was protected by the phone in my own office,
Right,
100 miles
right,
away from the
right.
closest guy. So I said, listen, the way we do it in the military procurement or the government procurement is we almost force them to get in a small room and come up with a feasible enough design that will give them the job. So
Right.
you got to have it work, and you got to have it weigh the same and be the same and go this high and do this and do that. But the funny thing is, it's a 5-person team that's doing it almost on the side sometimes just to get the proposal. And then the real problem is I hate to say this, but then I've been on the teams that have won the job. They're all happy. They go sit in the room of day one, and they show up the module and they show up the design, and this is it. This is what we're going to build. And I'm like, wait a minute. We won that. We got that to win the job. But again, it's one of those jobs where the bill of material was more than the program value, right?
Right,
You're like,
right.
it's not.
It's dead in the
It's
water
not.
before it goes. Yeah.
It's dead in the water before it goes, and the government's pushing that because they don't have the patience or trust the supply chain base to do the right things in that innovative environment. Until you set up, do you remember the Hope Diamond?
Of course I do.
Perfect example. We're not going to approve those sites, those remote sites, until you've done this, 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 and this, right? So they didn't have
gates, right? Not dates.
Those were gates, not dates, right? And so they had what they thought was the controls. They don't trust you to design it correctly and all that until we see it, right? The problem is when they finally approved it 3 months later, that tower no longer had a lease available. The Indian reservation, that other's on an Indian reservation and you can't build it. And by the way, that looks like water, but it's not, you know, that kind of thing. So by the time they actually approved it, 3/4 of that design changed.
Mm-hmm.
And why?
Right.
Because they didn't trust him in those early phases, Dennis. And until we proved that we've got the right team and they had some trust on our innovative levels and so forth, they finally said, we need the government to move that decision diamond way to the left. And remember that program managers and VP said they'll never do it.
Never do it.
Never
But they did.
do it. They did.
They did.
They did.
Because we thought it out. We thought it out down to the day and the hour, and we had a bunch of detail and a bunch of engineers going, this is the change we need.
And a bag full of wounds that they suffered by doing it the old way.
That's right.
That's most people didn't even know about, right? So,
all right. Well, Mike, let me ask you a deeper question here. People won't realize the political nature of some of those environments until they're in them, right? Highly politically charged. Inside of a defense supplier, up and down the supply chain of the defense supplier, we're passing drawings on to people and not communicating things like, if I had some more space, you wouldn't need an AMD you could use to, you know, how much of the culture costs money? I mean, I worry, I think about this all the time. I'm like, in just people covering their ass alone, what do you think that costs? What do you think that does to the cost of shit?
Oh my gosh. So people's reluctance to, well, like the Japanese, there's not a push to promote change early on. We want to see lots of cycles of learning. build some prototypes. I mean, I wish I was doing what I was doing when 3D printing was as popular as it was.
Right.
For us, we did 3D printing, but it cost us about $2,000 per module because of the equipment and so forth. This was 20 years ago.
Right.
It's a stereolithography, they called it, right?
Right.
But if I had 3D printing right now, man, I'd be putting out cycles of learning like this. I'd put it in people's hands. I'd put it in this and that. This thread design, they call it, is very powerful for an example. It's a culture change. But let me answer your question quickly. I'm going right back to that cost of change over the life cycle. You asked how much does it cost to not drive as much change as you can early on because of politics, because of, you'd have to admit you need to move the development date. You're going to piss the customer off early. All those political pressures, Dennis, cost, I'll just say 30% of the total end item lifecycle cost of any program we've done. So whatever, you got a $100 million program, I'll bet you that culture costs $30 million to that whole picture.
Wow.
I'll go out on a limb and say it's a 30% change. And I think I'm being conservative.
I think you are too.
Yeah.
I think you're
nice.
being kind and conservative. Yeah. And I think that the thing that people are like, oh, you guys are cocky or you're this or that. And I guess the thing is that we're above the politics, or we're benign. We're, exempt from the politics. I mean, I get in the Jeep and I drive away.
Yeah. That's
So every time you had us in, yeah, it was always a high pressure thing.
Let me tell you how high pressure it is. We had a huge customer on another $300 million job. We had won it. We were legacy provider for this. We'd been doing it for 10 years. And we did put some innovation into the next development. It was a complete redesign in a sense, and we learned a lot. But anyway, the customer calls. It was funny because I was in engineering at the time, and the guy asked me, would you go into manufacturing? I want you on my program. I was the 7th one on this program that had 300 people. He pulled me in and said, I really need you to do me a favor. And I said, okay, which engineering team am I heading up? He goes, no, you're heading up the manufacturing team. And I go, really? He goes, yeah, I need someone with, and I'll just tell you this story, okay? We get in and they had the proposal and it had a box and we're going to build it. And all the engineers come in and they're telling everybody in the room, this is it. And I'm like, time out. I mean, we're in development right now. Yeah, well, it's almost done. I said, it ain't done. So, but meanwhile, in parallel, the customer's talking to our program manager and asks him 2 things. Are you guys doing lean? Oh, yeah. He called me the day before, goes, they want to ask me about lean. Tell me about it. And I go, so I told him about value stream mapping and the things we can do and all that. He's like, great. He's writing it down. This is pathetic in a sense, but he's writing it down. Okay. Gets on the phone with the customer. 2 things. You doing lean? Yeah. And we're doing a value stream mapping. Oh, good. So customer checks the box. He goes, are you doing concurrent engineering? He said, absolutely. I've got the right guys on it. We're this and that. And the customer said, is everything going smoothly? And he goes, oh, smooth as a baby. And he goes, oh, good. Then you're not doing concurrent engineering. You're lying to me. And Bruce walks into the room at 7 at night upstairs, and we're throwing the staplers at each other, pissed off, arguing that we got to pull this thing back and fix a bunch of shit before we move forward. And he had this grin on his face that I'll never forget. He goes, I'll be right back. Runs downstairs, calls his customer up and says, they're yelling at each other. They're pissed. They're this or that. So I guess at the end of the day, your success in concurrent engineering means that almost everybody's a little upset and almost everybody didn't get what they want.
Right.
Okay. So you tell me that that's not going to be with these high powered, high smart, high dollar people. Why would you want to go and be on that team if I'm going to end up frustrated and not getting everything I want?
One of my clients calls that mutually dissatisfied.
Mutually dissatisfied, yeah. And that's a good thing, right?
And mutual dissatisfaction means you kind of got the most out of each other.
You really did.
Yeah.
And yet not everyone prevailed with everything they wanted.
Now let me ask you, did you hire me to do that value stream map?
I did.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, don't you remember? They had no time. We had to do it on a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
That's
because they saw no value in it, and we're not going to slow the program down.
How many people did you have? It was stadium seating. It was stadium seating.
We went over to this conference room that we had to move the curtains and open it up. And you guys did a value stream map that was 45, 50 feet long.
Easy. And I'm sitting there.
Not being generous, yeah.
Everybody is angry.
Everybody.
Everybody's
Well, it's because
angry.
it's Saturday and Sunday too.
Saturday and Sunday.
Right. Yeah.
I remember how nervous I am, right? And I walk up to the whiteboard and I pull the cap off my pen and I draw my first line, and it's a permanent marker on the whiteboard. Do you remember that?
Oh, and there's 20 engineers ready to tell you that too, right?
Oh, and then
Yeah,
everybody
that's
jumped
good.
on my throat. But we hooked them by break. By 11 a.m., we had them all hooked.
We had them all hooked, and that's when it was so massive we had to break it into three
different
correction
pieces.
zones, three different pieces, right?
Right. And you know,
by the way, oh, just huge. Okay.
No, after you.
By the way, I want to say, so when you're doing that, Dennis, when you guys do that, I told you a business to be in is you got a lot of things come up that are running perpendicular to the course of the event, which is to solve this problem. But in the doing so, you come across 5 or 6 other real key problems that you get consensus in the room. Oh yeah, and you look across the board, and everyone's like, that's FUBAR, man. So you go, okay, fine. You can't just go, well, bummer. Okay, let's go back to this, because people go, what the hell, you know? So you guys do the parking lot element. So I told you a business model is to call 2 months after we've implemented the changes and go, by the way, we want to come back and visit your parking lot.
We did. You never hired us. You were the one. You would only call us when you're asked.
My program manager goes, we're doing fine. Why do I need to do that? I'm like, that's the biggest frustration.
We get calls from you every two years, plus or minus, and it was when you were on another program causing more trouble.
Right.
And then we were. But at any rate, I agree.
Okay, I got to tell you the quick story then. You know, Tyrone.
Yeah.
You save him $9 million in that previous example. So he's all like, I'm a believer. This is awesome, right? So I sit by my phone in my office staring at the phone waiting for Tyrone to call to do the next one.
Right.
I'm like, okay, it's going to ring any minute now. Not ringing now. I go in his office and he goes, how long is this continuous improvement stuff going to take? And I'm like, Tyrone, do you hear yourself?
It's so crazy.
When are we done with it? I mean, how long is it going to take? I'm like, Jesus Christ. So you'd think if I saved a $9 million on a $300 million program, as your program manager, wouldn't and pay you the little bit we paid you, wouldn't you call up again and go, I don't know of any investment that can return that kind of return?
No,
and
right.
Yet he doesn't call again.
Right. It was a very little investment.
Very little, but why doesn't he? Tell me why.
Ego. No, I know.
Okay, that's ego. One. Put that on the list. Tell me another one.
Political culture and influence.
Okay.
If you are the boss in that kind of pressure, and this isn't Tyrone. Tyrone is super confident, but a lot of high pressure directors we see they want to be the one that had the answer. They want to be the one that drove the solution. A lot of people think that you quote unquote put lean in, like, oh, we put lean in because they have a shadow board somewhere or they studied cycle time once. They don't understand transformation's a never-ending process. And the more that you transform, the more difficult it becomes because you're starting to really use data to drive your behavior and your actions. And a lot of people don't want to solve problems because some of them get they get adrenaline pumps because they love chaos and they love crisis. And inside a crisis, politicking thrives. So what I find is most people are worried about how to get their career to the next level. And a lot of those directors get shown up, right? I mean, think about how many strap-on spines we put on people.
Right.
And prop their careers.
Strap-on porta-spine.
Yeah. Porta-spine. And how many different guys went from zero to hero because they got a voice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about the one program in particular where 2 relatively low-level supervisors, their careers went through the roof after that program.
Yeah, so people are afraid of getting shown up, bud. They're getting afraid of getting shown up.
Except it doesn't take long, as John's saying. There's some. It is the end justifies the means. It's the sausage machine you hear about, but when the sausage is good at the end of it, unfortunately, the level of pain that was needed in order to induce change was phenomenal. It was like, no. I mean, the Japanese don't go through that. They don't want any of that pain. They want to have it all up front. They don't want to suffer
Deming
it in
says
the
it
back.
takes crisis, right? Deming says it takes crisis.
Yeah. Why?
I don't know, man. I mean, I tried to tell you that we should be doing more lean, and you just kept calling when there was problems.
Well, I was doing when I was in engineering, when I first started the manufacturing stuff, we were in an engineering review on a very small program, but the chief engineer was in there.
Mm,
And I had my best guy on it. And he's talking Sigma levels for the design. And he says, and we were a Six Sigma company at the time. We invented
right.
the Six Sigma
That's right.
philosophy at the time. And his analysis came up that this is a 4.1 Sigma design. And when he finally put that quantitative figure up there, the engineers now admit the bit error rate, the frequency demand, the power demand, the weight, size, it met all these criteria, but they never considered the quality level or the production, the CPK, if you will, as a technical attribute. They
Right.
would not list it as neither would they put cost as a technical attribute either, which is a whole nother conversation I'd love to have with you guys. Nobody
Right.
does. The engineers are like, what the hell's that up there for?
Right.
But anyway, there was this argument ensued on the 4.2 Sigma design, and people were really upset about it and this and that. And Chuck was his name, was the chief engineer at the time. He got pissed and walked out the door. I followed him down the hall. He says, "Get away from me." I go in his office. He's literally shaking. I'm not having this conversation with you. And I said, "Chuck, I'm not leaving. You can call security. I'm not leaving this room till you and I talk through this, dude. Because I've got a lot of other good engineers like this, and we're putting the same kind of pressures and balance into these other programs. And you're the freaking chief engineer that will be in every review. I'm not leaving this room until we come to terms." It calmed down a bit, a little cussing here and there and this and that. And then he leaned forward to me when we were all calm and he goes, "I've got some of the best engineers in the world. I don't like it when someone criticizes their design and calls it ugly or says
Right.
it's substandard."
Right.
And I'm like, we've got to get out of that culture where when I'm telling you a fact like that, you don't take it personal. You consider it a design challenge and we work it. But no,
Right.
everybody there took it personal and it was an insult.
Right.
Okay. And it's so much that I got a guy that's been in the business 30 years shaking in his chair
Right.
like that. I'm like, oh my God, I learned so much from that. I'm like, wait, how do we get beyond that? I think that's one of the bigger barriers right there, Dennis. So I don't.
Well, Johnny, I mean, how many times have we seen continuous improvement drive someone to physical duress?
Oh yeah, I mean, we see both sides, right? We see some people get driven to euphoria because they all of a sudden the light bulb comes on and they go crazy. But there are others who are so rooted in what it is that they've created or what they own or whatever, and they just can't let go, or they can't push the I trust button, you know.
Yeah.
And it drives them mad. You know, it really does put a lot of stress on them for sure.
We do a ton more change management training up front now, Mike, than we used to.
Yeah.
In preparation for people to change, we've got to drop resistance. I do a full-on implicit bias training now, where we work on making sure that we give everybody an opportunity and we don't see people through the filter of different biases, whether it be implicit or explicit. We also talk about biases in data. I mean, how many times have you seen people use data for their advantage politically, maybe?
Just like you said just now, people don't put the cost as a piece of the data.
Yeah.
Let's leave that data out. What is cost? What is cost doing?
Oh, it's crazy.
How is cost a technical issue?
How does cost?
That's their question.
So from the very beginning with our innovation projects, you know, and lean, we do transformation work, change management work, mostly with it's rewiring the brain of the leader. It's usually
possible.
no,
That's a tall order.
No, it's not.
But I would say more times than not, it is.
7 out of 10, it's worth it.
You guys know how disappointed I am at some of the senior leaders where I'm thinking, you know how you use starting fluid in a motor that won't start, right? And you're like, okay, blah, 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 it gets going a bit, and then it dies. And then it gets going again, and then it gets going fast enough that it can suck its own gas and run fine. And you're like, okay, one more event, maybe another $10 million savings, and we're going to have this director on our side.
Right.
And he's going to be an enthusiastic requester of this, and it never happens.
No.
Yeah.
It wasn't their
So
idea.
I don't know how you could rewire some of these guys. The best way is success follows success, or however they say it, right?
We just wait until it gets bad enough for them again, then they go.
Oh, isn't that terrible to say that, Dennis? Isn't that?
Yeah, but I
If
mean,
I'm running a company, is that what I want to know? Is the only time I bring in real good help is when my back's so far against the wall, I have no other out.
so let's call that the 3 out of 10. The 7 out of 10 mature and grow and treat people with respect and get performance without pressure and use data and science and have people come to work and learn. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Right. So more times than not, we get those. You can create any culture you want under one roof, even in 2020.
we loved the fact that you had us parachute in when times were really, really tough, and you threw very difficult things onto us, and that was fantastic. We've had the other side of the spectrum too, where we had another long-term client who I'm still very, very friendly with now. He's going to be one of our guests as well, where we essentially moved into several of his plants, but one in particular in Chicago for 3-4 years, and really had that plant humming.
5 of us every day.
Yeah. And really turned that around. Now, the unfortunate part of the end of that story was that all of that work was to help them get sold to a venture capital company.
Oh, yeah.
And as they were bought, they no longer saw the new owners no longer saw the benefit of paying these other folks to come in and help them run their plant.
Mm-hmm.
And so they shut it right down. Well, now we still have a lot of friends inside those plants, and every single one of those plants in that division has had huge backslides.
Yes.
So that the CEO has been calling me again recently. Now, it's too bad because none of that had to happen. We could, and we had the following there. We were actually helping some of their people become their organic people who would continue to do that work once we were really gone.
Yeah, that's right.
And then it all came crashing down.
And Mike,
so those leadership changes were catastrophic in a sense in that regard.
Yeah, we see the worst lean enterprise transformations are the ones that relapse when one person or two people leave.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, so if it's like a middle manager dependent transformation, it just doesn't work.
No, you're right. I mean, and that's the by the way, this is another statistic that used to drive my team nuts because they'd work their butts off to make change, right, and try it. And I said, okay, by the way, they're walking out the door very frustrated that somebody didn't adopt their changes or whatever. I said, oh, by the way, just a quick metric for you. The best change agents in the world are 25% effective.
That's yeah.
They're like, what's that? I go, yeah. So you have 4 changes. If one's adopted, you're one of the best in class. And they like, well, that's an indictment on the process, and who would ever pick that as a career? And I mean, that tells you just how hard change is to these guys. Hey, right. It reminds me of a quick story I got to tell. Sorry, it's about you guys, but I remember when I asked you to go down to San Diego for that one company.
Yeah.
And it was one we had acquired, and you guys were up in a lobby or some kind of balcony or something, and looking out with the VPs and stuff, and you saw the whole factory floor. And then John or somebody, you guys asked like 3 questions. So what's your throughput here, and what's your output there, and what's your this there and that there? And they guys answer it. And then you two looked at each other and said, yeah. And they go, what? And they go, well, you got way too much inventory on the floor right now.
Yeah.
Way too much, right?
Yeah.
I got a call. Yeah, we don't think these guys will help, this and that. Okay, this and that. So they brought in like an Arthur Anderson or some kind of bullshit right that. So we're in a meeting, a program review about 2 months later. This guy comes in to give a briefing. We have determined through 2.5 weeks of analysis and flows, 14 simulations.
Oh no, he froze.
He looks a little bit like Max Headroom right there, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
Him and Motorcycle Mike.
They have way too.
We lost you there for a second.
Yeah,
I don't. Let's see. Can you see me now?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay,
you're
but
back.
I can't hear. I can't see. Okay, I'm sorry. Where did I leave you? Just
They came in 2.5 weeks later after doing
2.5.
much mastication. I'm choosing my word
Yeah,
carefully.
mental mastication, and came in and said they had way too much inventory on the floor. And I looked at my VP and I said, dude, my guy said that in 7 minutes of standing there.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know why I thought about that, but and I can't see you guys for some reason.
Well, we're coming close to our time here at any rate. I think
Okay.
for me, I'm really grateful that you're joining us on this podcast. I'm looking forward to a few more sessions where we dig into some of these other issues that are relevant for people. You know, John and I are going to try and get you off the bench and into the game, helping out some of our innovation clients with your concurrent engineering expertise. And it's just fun having you here, man. I mean, some of the most proud experiences I've had in my career have been serving your projects. So I'm grateful for those chances and for the stuff I've learned from you.
And likewise, I mean, trust me, you already know I've learned a lot more from you than you've learned from me. So
that's probably true.
I'm in. Well, at least you're modest, but
I'm kidding. All right. So what we do, Mike, at the end is we do a quick plus delta. You know this routine.
Mm-hmm.
So would you give us something you like, something you think could be different?
If we're going to continue and have different topics, you could see how many roads we can go down.
Mm-hmm.
And then I liked, as in each of these, we used examples. There's nothing, I think, to convey messages to people. Have you ever been in a setting where they go, would you like to hear an example? Everybody in the room would love to hear an example of what you just espoused or whatever, right? So I think our use of examples was positive. I think it's easy to do. My wife did ask me, have you prepared for this? And I said, honey, I've been preparing for this for 35 years. As you notice, none of us are reading anything. None of us are scripting anything. And I could do this in front of 2 of you, or I've done it in front of 200. So, I mean, It's just the way it is. You understand it. As I said before, you believe it. So it makes it easy. I like the format because it makes it easy for us. As you can see, guys, this was supposed to be half an hour.
Yeah.
We got so much we can talk through and so much we can learn from each other still. I'm jazzed about it. Process-wise, I got to figure out. We're a lot better, but this is my first Zoom stuff. I'm setting up my office still. And by the way, there's a run on optical cameras and stuff because of everybody doing home office. Best Buy, Staples, all of them are gone. They've been on back order for weeks. So it's bizarre, but everyone's working from home. But so anyway, technically, I got to work through some things here.
That's a good delta.
As a delta, yeah.
And Johnny, what about you?
You know what? My plus is the fact that we can get together as, you know, like no time has passed. We can bust each other's sack and just laugh a lot. And I love the laughter that the three of us generate. And it's all with real good respect, and we all love each other. And this is really a fun thing for me, and I hope there's many more of these. The Delta, I think we went longer than we ought to have, you know, and I think we'll just as we figure out what topics we want to cover, we can, as we move forward, we can kind of stay a little more focused, and that'll be taking care of itself.
All right, thank you. My plus is definitely similar to yours. It's our chance to get together. You know, the ability to connect in this way is it's great. I hope that others can, you know, at least empathize or commiserate, or maybe even learn, dare I say, learn a little bit from some of the stuff we talk about. But my delta is the same, Johnny. Maybe we went a little long, and I think, Mike, there's all these different roads we can go down. We should identify, you know, Engineering Mike's series, and what are some of the things that we can, you know, bring to the table so that others can learn from the experience that we've had together.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so thank you so much for all your time. Thank you for listening, and for now, I'm Uncle D. Peace.